Hi everyone and welcome to the Invisible Second Shooter. I'm Joe Brady, your host today, and we're going to continue our exploration of remote cameras. Now the focus of today's session is going to be on using multiple remote cameras at a wedding, and we actually simulated a wedding for today's presentation. And we're going to do this in order to capture images from a point of view that would be either difficult or even possible to get during an actual ceremony. Now capturing images like we're going to see can add interest by providing a glimpse into points of view that the audience would never actually get to see. The unique perspective of these images can also help differentiate a photographer from the competition. So let's start with the basic question. First of all, let's go back to why set up a remote camera. Now for a wedding, having a remote camera, or as I actually used in this session, remote cameras, add a few things to the event. First of all, one photographer can capture multiple points of view. And two, images that would be difficult to get become easy. Think balcony maybe in a church or over a dance floor at the reception. Images that capture a point of view also that are unique are possible with a remote camera. We're going to place cameras in a spot where a photographer would not be allowed during an actual ceremony. Now, to record an event from behind the scenes, we staged a wedding at a nearby church. We used St. Mary's Episcopal Church in Tuxedo, New York. It's a beautiful building. It was built in 1888, and it provided a beautiful setting and some technical challenges as well. Now, the lighting inside the building, while very lovely, was pretty dim, and it required that we use an ISO of 1600 for our ambient light images. Again, times during the ceremony, you wouldn't be allowed to use a flash. The results, however, were great. So let's take a visit inside the church, and we'll start by, I'll show you the process to set up both remote flashes and remote cameras. So let's start taking a look at the remote gear used, starting with our behind the altar camera. So here we are in St. Mary's Episcopal Church in Tuxedo Park, New York. Beautiful building. It's a little dark in here though, so we're going to have to adapt to that. And what we're here to do is set up some cameras in remote locations. And one of the cool things about this is we're going to be able to put cameras in a place that you normally wouldn't be allowed to go, particularly during a ceremony. You would not be allowed there as a photographer. Yet we've got a really cool rig that's going to allow that to happen. And of course, yes, first I spoke with Reverend Betty, who's going to be our officiant today, and asked her what's okay, what are the places I can put things, do you mind a camera here or there? And generally, if there's not a flash, most people are okay with that. I'm using Pocket Wizard Plus 3s today. The reason for that is I've got the 4 zones, the A, B, C, D, and we're going to really take advantage of that because I'm actually shooting with 3 cameras, 2 off-camera flashes. It's going to be really cool. It's going to allow me to kind of cover the entire church with just me. So that's why we're calling this the Invisible Second Shooter. In fact, since I've got 3 cameras, it could even be the Invisible Third Shooter. So follow me up here. Let's take a look at this rig here. This is something new. This is called an F-plate. It's very cool. And what it's designed to do is have a tripod mount on top. I've got a Pocket Wizard here. There's a cut through here, and the reason for this is so that you can change the batteries without having to unscrew the Pocket Wizard that's here. So I've got my tripod mount, a Pocket Wizard, and this is a +3 going into a Canon 7D. So I have an ACC cable. The beauty of the ACC cable with this system is it obeys the half press. So if I push this down halfway, the camera will refocus. So I can pre-focus, but I don't need to. Since I'm not going to be able to get to the camera, and people are going to be moving in and out here in front of the altar, by having the half press available, the camera is going to be able to get the shots. So what I've done is this camera is on channel 18 and on zone B. So this is my B camera, and I'm just going to get this into place. I've got this on kind of a wide angle lens. It's actually an 11-18. Again, I spoke with Reverend Betty ahead of time to find out how the ceremony is going to play out. What are the positions that the bride and groom are going to be in? And they're going to spend some time here in front of the altar. And this is a place I would not be able to get to as a photographer. Now I've got, as I mentioned, actually this is an 11-16 lens. It's pretty wide, even though I'm shooting it at 16. Keep in mind that these cameras are 17 megapixels. I've got my Sony Alpha 99 here, which is 24 megapixels. There's a huge amount of resolution out of these cameras. Most prints that end up in a wedding album are going to be little. Really, if I had 3 megapixels, it would be plenty. So I'm keeping it wide so I can capture all the different details and give myself a lot of flexibility when it comes to cropping. So I've got my camera set. I did meter ahead of time, so that's the other important part we'll talk about in a second. Everything's metered. The camera's on manual. Focus is on autofocus, but the half press on the Pocket Wizard is going to allow me to do that. So simply match my channel again. I know this is my B camera. I've got channel 18 here with B turned on. I hit my test button halfway. The camera focuses. Hit it all the way. It fires. I don't know if you can hear that. I'll put my mic near. You can hear the camera's taking the shots. In fact, I just got some shots of Rick videoing this whole thing going on. So really cool system. F-plate, tripod head, Pocket Wizard Plus 3, ACC cable going into the remote part of the Canon, pre-metered, set up my ISO and my shutter speed and my aperture here, and that's it. And it's going to give you a really cool point of view in a camera in a position that you normally wouldn't be able to even get to during the ceremony. It's really going to add a little bit of difference to the kind of images you can get compared to what a photographer just out in the sanctuary can do. So a couple of questions came in while the video was playing, so let me address that. Some of the questions that were asked are things that are going to be covered real soon, so just stay tuned. First of all, someone asked, do I shoot with auto or custom white balance? And they mentioned specifically for landscapes. And if it's custom, do I use a white balance card or an 18% gray card? Good question. And I am going to go into that a little bit more. You'll see it. But what I use for that is my little friend here, the Color Checker Passport. This goes with me everywhere, and I will use this to do my white balancing. Now, me personally, I never, ever, ever use auto white balance. I've talked about that before. To me, the problem with auto white balance is it's kind of like full TTL automatic program mode exposure. It's going to change every time the scene changes just a little bit. If you reframe or someone enters the scene wearing different color clothing, that can change the white balance. So what I do is I will typically do a custom white balance in the camera. However, sometimes that's not always appropriate, especially during a wedding where it's basically combat photography. You're always running around. So I will do it in post. I will do it in software. And if that's the case, what I'll typically do is I'll set my camera on a preset. If it's inside the church and I'm using flash, I'll set it for flash. If it's inside and it's ambient, then I'll usually set it for tungsten. But what I will do is take a shot of a card. Now again, this is a Color Checker Passport. In fact, this is the Sekonic edition of the Color Checker Passport. It's got our gray card and our white balance card. I will typically use the white balance card. Someone asked about using the older 18% gray cards. I generally will avoid them, mostly because they're more for exposure than color. A lot of them actually have a little bit of a color cast to them. And if you try to white balance off of those, it's going to throw the color off. So again, I'll talk more about white balance a little bit later because some of it in this kind of situation does get a little bit subjective, but good question. What else? Someone asked about the advantages or the need for the Pocket Wizard Plus 3 if somebody already has the TT1 and TT5s, the Mini and the Flex. And I just happen to have these here. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit as well. Everything I'm doing, almost everything I'm doing, almost that, with the Plus 3s, I can do with the Mini and the Flex, and particularly if I have a combination of with the AC3 zone controller. That is going to be a subject for another day, which is coming up soon. But I am actually going to throw in a TT5 Flex unit into the mix today so you can see that. And let's see. Someone asked about how do I focus on people and not on the chandelier? I'm going to guess the chandelier is up a little higher than the people. What I'm going to gather is that maybe you're having trouble focusing in a low light. Typically what I will do is I will look for a spot. I'll look for some kind of edge where somebody is. And you're going to see that when we set up our remote camera for coming up the aisle. I pre-focus on a spot and wait for people to hit that spot. That way I know it's always going to be in focus. But good question. More questions coming up. And again, some of you are asking questions and things that we're going to cover. Before we continue on, though, I did want to show you a little bit more about this F-plate system. Really simple in its design. In fact, here's a bare F-plate. It's an aluminum plate that has a soft rubber backing, and it's got holes in it for mounting a tripod head and the Pocket Wizard. They're also made for multiple cameras. Now, if you go on fplate.net, and we'll send you this link as well, you can see all the uses for them. I believe the maker originally thought sports when doing this, and there's some great sports shots on their website about that. I found it really useful for a wedding, though, because this becomes my entire remote camera setup. It's very compact and it's very easy to use. The beauty is I've got the hole cut in the bottom, so I can open up the battery compartment without having to unmount the +3. And I've got an ACC cable running from the +3 into the remote release port of the camera. Now I've got a tripod head on here. This is a heavy enduro PHQ head, probably more head than you really need to have on a remote camera set. One thing I did like about this head is it's got a lot of spirit levels built in. So if I was concerned about having everything very level, and maybe the camera was difficult to get to behind, I can make sure everything is level just by looking at these. But really, any kind of tripod head will unscrew off your tripod and you can put one on here. Really handy system, very elegant in its simplicity, and I really had a lot of fun using it. Let's head back to St. Mary's and let's talk about some flashes now. We're going to set up some remote flashes to capture the bride, actually me too, walking up the aisle. Take a look. All right, so let's take a look at a couple of the off-camera flash rigs I've got set up. I've actually got 2 of them, and what I'm using these initially for is for the people coming up the aisle. So this would be the bridesmaid, and then the bride being walked up the aisle by her father. So in this case, I've just got, it's a Canon 580 EX2 flash, mounted on an umbrella mount. I've got a Pocket Wizard +3. Now I have this one set to both channels C and D, and I'll explain why on that later. I've got a cable going, a sync cable going from the Pocket Wizard into the sync port of the 580 EX2. Also, if you're going to do this a lot, this is an external battery pack. It greatly increases the life of your flashes through the course of a long day like a wedding. Highly recommend investing in one of these. So what I need to do is meter my flash. And what I recommend when you're doing this kind of shooting is, this is a very dim room here. Trying to rely on autofocus in this low light is going to be really difficult for your camera to do. So what I generally like to do is to pre-focus. So what I'm going to do is meter the lights from a very specific spot. So I can see as they hit each of these lines in the pews that this is a good distance to the flash. I would say this is probably about 8 feet away. So what I'm going to do is meter, and I've got 2 meters with me, so you can see them both used. This is a 308, and I've got my ISO on these cameras set to 800, so let me just adapt that. So let me put 800 in here. Now this particular meter does not have a Pocket Wizard trigger in it, so I'm going to use the one in my hand. It does have something called a waiting mode though, so if I hit the read button and then push in my meter, it will give me the reading. So I just push in, it'll wait for 90 seconds to see a flash, just push it in, and I get my reading. So I want to get a nice distance from the flash to the subject. I've got 2 flashes, I've got my main over here. When I tried just the one light, the shadows on the sides of the face were a little bit too dark. So I put another flash a little further back. This one is at 1/4 power. The one further back is at 1/8 power, plus it's about another 5 or 6 feet back. So I'm going to take my meter reading. Again, this is a 308, does not have a Pocket Wizard built into it. So I'm just going to take my reading back towards the camera position, and I've got 90 seconds. Pop the flash, and I see that at a 60th of a second, I've got 7.1. Now the reason I chose a 60th of a second is the ambient light here is very low. The flash is going to stop the action. If I just took an ambient reading without the flash, it's like 0.9 as far as f-stops go. It is so much lower than what the flash is, it's not even going to contribute. So that means I can have my shutter speed fairly slow. The flash is going to stop the action, but by having a 60th of a second, it will allow the windows in the back to glow enough so that they're going to actually show up. So again, dim, 60th of a second. The reading I get is 7.1. I just put that in my camera and can fire away. Now what I'm going to do is use 2 different cameras. I've got one remote camera way up at the front of the aisle. The other one is going to be handheld, and I'm going to use the Sony Alpha 99 for that. This will be my C camera. The other camera will be my D camera. So that's why I have the flashes set for both C and D. whichever camera I use, it will go ahead and fire the flash. Now the other option is if you've got a Sekonic 478DR, this has the Pocket Wizard triggers built into it. So I can actually fire my lights and even my remote cameras right from here. So what I've done is I've got my lights set on channel 18, and if you remember the two here on the aisle, our channels are both set for C and D. So I hit the little wrench icon, go to radio channel and zone, make sure that I've got channel 18 here, and I've got A, B, C, D. I can turn them on, all on for right now. Actually, I'm going to turn off B, because that's my remote camera. And if I hit this, it's going to go ahead and fire that. So I hit OK, point it right up back the aisle, and my flash fires, and I get the same reading. I get F7, I'm at a 60th of a second at 800 ISO. Now what I can do is, as the couple or as someone's coming up the aisle, I just wait for them to hit this spot. I just look with my other eye that's not looking through the viewfinder. As soon as I hit this spot, I take my shot. My remote camera is pre-focused on this spot. The beauty of that is it's not going to hunt. It's going to get exact perfect exposure every time, and everything's going to be in focus because I'm looking for where they hit. The camera on my shoulder I'll be using to walk around. Since I also have the ability to fire the flashes with it, then I can change my position live as it's happening. So just with one person and 3 cameras, I can be all over the place and get all kinds of different points of view and really get great coverage of this wedding. All right, a couple more good questions. Somebody asked, do I use manual exposure during weddings? And the answer to that is yes. I use manual exposure all the time. And it's going to come back to using a light meter. I will always do that. Somebody asked about focusing again, that a few of you want to understand how the camera behind the altar is going to focus on the right thing. Good question. Keep in mind that this is a very wide lens. And your focus depth, your depth of field that you're going to have during a focus is going to be dependent on how big the subject is in the frame. And I went fairly wide in order to have a lot of depth of field, even at kind of a middle aperture. We were typically at f4 to f5.6. However, by keeping the subject small, I was able to have a lot more depth of field than you might think. And as witnessed by here, this is one of the images, and I'll show you this more a little bit later. In this particular image here, this is maybe less than a quarter of the actual full frame. Yet there's so much resolution in these cameras, as I'll mention again, that you can do that. In fact, if you take a look at this print is actually 12 by 24 inch enlargement of a piece of the frame, and it really held up beautifully. Now, as far as getting the focus in the camera, what I will do is I'll set my focus points to the middle of the camera. I won't have kind of that matrix focusing on, because you're right, if the minister or the priest happens to end up in the corner of the frame and the camera sees them closer, it might try to track to them. Since I know where everybody's going to be during the ceremony, I will use center focus points, and that's what I will have everything set on, so that just as the couple moves in and out a little bit, it will focus on them. That's one of the beauties to me, again, about using the +3, and I'll show you this closer again a little bit later, where you can push in the test button halfway, and that will focus the camera first. So I'll use just center focusing points. I'll have a pretty wide frame. I'll have the couple relatively small in the frame, again, to have a lot of depth of field, and that really does work. Give it a try, you'll be amazed. Going back to the whole shooting manually, it really comes back to, again, why I use a meter. And let's take a little closer look at the meters. I used 2 different meters during the shoot. I used a Sekonic 478DR, and I used a very basic meter. If you're new to metering and you want to get into it inexpensively, this is a great meter. This is the Sekonic 308S. It does not have the Pocket Wizard transmitter built into it. However, it's very simple to use. In fact, let me show you the mode here. I'm going to show you up real close. So it's got 3 modes on the top, which are cycled through with the mode button. So that's just for ambient light. Hit the mode button once, and it goes over to what's called the waiting mode. In that function, what it'll do is you'll hit the measuring button, which is this big button here on the side, and then the meter will wait for 90 seconds to actually see a flash, and then you give you a reading. The last one over there, it's got a little flash with a C, which means connected. What you can actually do, I don't know anyone that actually does it anymore. In fact, I'm not even going to take off the cover. There's a little sync port here on the bottom of the meter that would allow you to run a sync cable from the meter to your flash, but really annoying. I find the wait mode works really well. So I just put it on there. I just hit the button on the side to take a reading, and now it's going to wait for 90 seconds. So if I come back here, I've got a flash here on a stand. If I come back here, it's still waiting. I can just point it back to my light, hit the test button, it fires, gives me my reading. So you can see I've got a 100th of a second at f8 at 200 ISO from that distance. So it's really that simple. One of the nice things about the 478DR, again, is it's got the trigger built into it. In fact, I can go in, I'll show you this real close as well. Again, let me go back to the main menu. I can hit the little wrench icon there, go to radio channel and zone. I'm on standard channels, and I have my flash set for 18. You can see I've got my A, B, C, D zones here that mirror what we have on the +3s. I'm just going to turn them all on right now. Flash is on 18, hit OK. So now what I can do is come back to here, and again, just hold it out, take my reading. Now the meter actually fires the flash, and I get my result, and that's as easy as it is. I didn't use one during the shoot, but if you happen to have a 758DR, this has all the same functionalities. It's all built in here as well. I'll show you where that is as well if it's new to you. So Rick, if you could take a close look here. And again, we've got a lot of buttons on here, but if I go through the modes, I'll cycle through them. Once I get to the end, it comes up with the Pocket Wizard channel. That's built in here as well. I can spin the jog wheel until I get to my 18. Notice once I hit above 17, I get the A, B, C, D zones, again, just like our +3s. I go to 18, I'll just hit the button once. That is now locked into channel 18. And again, 200 ISO, if I set my shutter speed at 100, just like we had, same thing, take my reading, just hit the read button, and it fires the flash, and I get the same result. F8, 100th of a second at ISO 200. So each of these meters will all do that, starting from the very inexpensive 308S, very handy, very dependable meter, the all-digital 478DR, and then I do love this meter, particularly if you're a landscape shooter. I'm going to talk more about this in the future. This is the 758. And again, the advantage of the 478 758 is it has the Pocket Wizard trigger built in. However, they all have that waiting mode if you just want to use a Pocket Wizard to trigger. Let's take a closer look at really the piece that made it all possible, our radio triggers. Now, I was using Pocket Wizard +3s for all my remote control systems. Having easy access to both the different channels and the zones makes it real simple to fire both cameras and flashes as I saw fit. So take a look here. It's a little bit close-up of the +3 itself. Very simple to follow, and on-off switches, also the mode button, a test fire button in the middle, your ABCD zones around the test button, and then your up and down channel selectors. So if we take a little closer look at the readout, you can see the mode display. It's displaying transmit receive right now. You can have it just transmit, just receive. There are also other modes which we've talked about in the past. The channel display and the zone display, as well as telling you what kind of state your battery's in. So how and where were all of these Pocket Wizards used? Now I had one +3 on each camera and on each flash. I also had one extra unit in my hand so that I could fire the flashes with my handheld camera and then quickly fire my remote camera as well. Now this might sound like a bit of an extravagance, but having a spare of any of your equipment is always a good idea. Let's take a little closer look at the equipment list itself. This was all the stuff that I used during this shoot, and you may not use this much gear on a shoot, but I just wanted to show you the possibilities. My main camera was my Sony Alpha 99, which had a 24-70 2.8 lens, and that had a Pocket Wizard +3 on it. Channel 18 matched to my flashes on 18. My remote camera that you just saw behind the altar on the F plate was a Canon 7D with that Tokina 11-16 lens on it. Remote camera 2, which you're going to see in a bit, was another Canon 7D with a Canon 70-200 2.8 lens on it. Now that was set for channel 17, and we'll see why in a little bit. And then lastly, my two remote flashes were two Canon EX 580EX2s. What I want to make clear is, since I'm shooting everything in manual, it really doesn't matter what mix I have as far as my lights and my cameras. I've got my Sony Alpha 99 here. This is set for channel 18. I've got my Canon 580EX2 flash here. And as long as they're set, remember I'm shooting manually, I can fire my camera, fire my flash from the camera, and it doesn't really care what flash is out there, because the only signal that's going on is it's telling the thing to fire. Now, the setup in the aisle had to have a slightly different configuration, since this remote camera also had to fire remote flashes. In this case, the +3 on the camera gets set one channel lower than the +3 on the flash. This system is called a relay system. It sounds a little strange, but it's important to do it this way. So let's see how to set up a remote camera that's also going to fire off-camera flashes. So the other part of this puzzle is, I've got my remote camera here, way up here. I've got my lights down the aisle. Now, I've got a longer lens on here. This is a 70-200. The beauty is, it doesn't really matter. I could go anywhere with this camera because the distance from the flash to the subject is staying the same all the time. So there's one little difference you have to do here. When I have a remote camera like this that's also firing flashes, I have to set up something called a relay. The difference is, now this Pocket Wizard is set for channel 17, and it's set for both transmit and receive. I've again got an ACC cable running from the front of the Pocket Wizard into the remote cable release. What I did was pre-focus on the spot. So I'm just going to be watching for whoever's walking up the aisle to hit that spot. Then I know I can press the shutter and fire. Now, the reason that this is on channel 17 is my remote or my meter is going to fire this Pocket Wizard, which is going to then fire the camera. The camera then relays that up one channel to the flashes, which are set on channel 18. The reason for that is the camera has to be ready to actually fire its shutter. If I had them both set for channel 17, or the camera and the lights both set for 18, the lights would fire before the camera shutter had a chance to open. So this is on 17, those remote lights are on 18. I've got everything set up. One of the nice things about a long lens, I want to shoot vertically here. I'm just going to release the lens mount, rotate to vertical frame, and what I've got is a really nice full length as everybody's coming up the aisle. And it's just as soon as I hit the spot, just hit it, I've got my shot, and it's that easy. The reason I want to be on manual focus here is because I don't know who's going to get up, who's going to vary. The camera might start hunting. Again, it's fairly dark back there. So pick a spot, focus on that, and you've got a little bit of range. We're at f7 here, so we've got a little bit of depth of field because of the distance we're dealing with. It's going to make it really easy. Just when I see each person hit the spot, I just hit the trigger, again, either on here or on a Pocket Wizard, takes the shot. Exposure is going to be perfect every time, and it's going to be in focus because it doesn't have to worry about someone else stepping into the frame. It's a really beautiful thing, so let's put it to work. So the last piece to this puzzle, well, that's actually the camera that I'm using in my hand. Now, this is the one I would actually walk around and take shots with. However, I can also use it to fire cameras. So for example, when we've got the couple up at the altar, I want to be able to get both points of view. So what I can do is set this to the same channel as my remote camera. Every time I take a picture with this shutter, it's going to fire the remote camera also. You just have to remember where you put your camera so you don't end up in the line of sight of your own images. Now, what I've done here is one little difference. Since I am shooting this camera manually myself, I do not want to be in relay mode. In this case, the Pocket Wizard on top of the camera needs to be the same channel as the flashes that are down the aisle. The cool thing about this setup is now, I'm along one side of the aisle here. I've got my two flashes, I've got my spot. Still 800 ISO at 7.1. My remote camera is across the aisle. It's doing close-up, full lengths vertically from one side. I can walk around with this and turn my lights on and off and that camera on and off right from the top of the camera. So I can do one of two things. I can either just hit my test button and fire the other camera, or I can just take my own shots but use the same lights because I've got this one on C and my other remote camera on D. So I simply just wait for them to hit the spot. When I see it, I just hit my shutter and it fires those lights. So I'm sharing these lights amongst these two cameras. Just so in case you ask, one thing you cannot do is you cannot get two cameras to fire a single set of lights and expect them to sync at the same time. there's just enough of a delay, enough of difference between camera shutter speeds from one to the other. It's just not going to work. So I'm going to share the lights amongst cameras, but either or camera is actually going to fire those lights. So let's get everybody ready. Let's get our bride and groom, and let's get this show on the road. So first of all, thank you guys for using the chat room. You guys have sent me a whole bunch of great questions that I could go on for a half an hour just answering them, but let me try to keep it a little bit shorter. I want to go back to that focusing issue again with the camera behind the altar because, again, you have much more focus distance than you might think. And what I did was I brought up a little app that I love. It's a free app for the iPhone. I don't know if it exists on other platforms. I'm sure it does. This one is called Field Tools Depth of Field Guide, and I'll ask Jen to put it in the follow-up email. And what it allows you to do is to put in your camera and lens and then tell it the distance to the subject and the aperture you're using and the focal length, and then it will tell you what is your near and far focusing distance. In fact, Rick, if you would just come in a little closer here, just so I can show this app. So here it is. So this is the Tokina 11-16. Now, even if I put it at 16 millimeters, and even if I'm using a fairly wide open aperture like f4, and my distance from my camera to the subject is something as small as 7.5 feet, you can see up top here it tells me the near and far focus. So from 4.5 feet to 23 feet is in focus. So I've got, what is that number? What does that add up to? I've got 18.5 feet of depth of field. You can have your subjects moving around a whole lot and they're still going to stay sharp. And if I increase this distance a little bit, in fact, they were a little further away. I want to say they were more like about 12 feet away from the camera. So if I go to 12 feet, actually they were closer than 12 because at 12 feet, from 5.8 feet to infinity is in focus. So again, it all has to do with how big is the subject in the viewfinder. And with a wide lens like that and them being fairly small, have an incredible amount of depth of field, so focus is really not an issue. Someone asked, what kind of stands am I using so people don't trip over the stand? Good question. It's a good point as to really how you position the stand. I use generally Kupo stands. Again, I'll ask Jen to I'll get the specific model number that we can send you in the email follow-up. One thing I like about them is they're metal stands, and the legs are not extremely wide. But they're a heavy metal, so they're pretty standard. And I positioned them in the aisle so that the leg really wasn't sticking out. But it is something you do always have to keep an eye on. I generally try not to venture too far from my stands when people are coming in. Once the ceremony starts and people have seated, then it's usually not an issue. Someone else asked, do I gel the flash to balance it with the ambient? I actually used to do that. I've kind of stopped doing that. So the question is, the ambient light is going to be very yellow. Where my flash is going to be fairly mid kind of daylight almost. If you're into Kelvin temperatures, my flash is about 5500 K, where the ambient light of a tungsten light is around 3200 K. However, in a situation like this church had such dim lighting. The actual Kelvin temperature of the lights was below 3,000. It was around actually 2,300 or so because it was very dim. It got very orangey. What I found is that your eyes kind of get used to that. And to be able to gel my flash down that far was really going to cut down on the output a lot. I prefer to let those distant lights keep kind of their amber glow and have the folks get illuminated by the flash with the more daylight look. Since I like to have a slightly warmer white balance than usual when I'm shooting in a church, since my white balance is set somewhat towards the tungsten, even though I'm using flash, the difference becomes much less. It's a subjective thing. It's a look that you might want to go for. Experiment with it. You can put a yellow gel over the flash just to bring it temperature downwise a little bit. But again, I will custom white balance and then warm up from there. Someone asked, do I ever have issues with the Pocket Wizard not triggering the flash? This is a good subject to talk about. When I first got started with them, occasionally that would happen. And mostly it's because of batteries. If your flash batteries are starting to go, or if your Pocket Wizard batteries are starting to go, that can happen. With the triggers like the +3, the +X, which is right here, similar kind of unit. With these units, they're very simple triggers. You can see there's one little pin on the bottom. They're just telling the remote flash to fire. They're very foolproof that way. On the Mini and the Flex, I've got a Flex here, a Mini with an AC3 on top of it. Since these units are really basically little computers, there's a lot going on. If the battery power starts to fade on these, then you're going to probably have a chance, a little more chance of a flash not firing. So do make sure that you have fresh batteries and that you have the firmware updated in these things. These units have little USB connections. The Flex, it's right here in the front. Plug it into your computer, use the free utility, and make sure everything is updated. Let's see. Somebody asked, will multiple flashes cause overexposure from one or the other angle? The answer to that is no. It's all about distance to the subject. I can't remember, I don't think the video showed yet, but I'm going to show you a real old school way of keeping track of that. Remember, it's just distance as they're coming up the aisle. As long as they're at the correct distance and I've metered the combination or the contribution of both flashes, that is going to remain a constant because my flashes are on manual. They're just on manual power. Someone asked about how fast will the battery drain if you shoot with the +3 on pre-focus. Well, the +3 pre-focus, let me just clarify that part. When you have a +3, when you hit the test button halfway, that little half coffee bean that I showed you earlier, that wakes up the camera and will then focus. Where you're going to run it, and that's not going to cause any battery drain. The camera will last all day that way. Where you get into battery drain is if you're using a system that's using what's called a pre-release trigger cable. And here's a pre-release trigger for my Sony. And this has got an inline switch into it. I've shown this before. In fact, I'll show it up close, Rick, if you just zoom in here. So this would be you would use this instead of the ACC cable. You see it's got a big 1, 0 here. If I turn it to 0, it just becomes, in essence, the same as the ACC cable. If I put this on 1, what that does is, in essence, it's like pressing the shutter of your camera all the time. So the camera's constantly focusing, constantly metering. That will drain the battery faster. If you did not see it, a couple weeks ago I did a presentation on using remote cameras for birds. Again, in that I used my Alpha 99. I had the pre-release trigger so that the camera was focusing and ready to go all the time. I found my batteries lasted, continuously pressed, they lasted for about 2.5 hours. So yes, have a couple of multiple batteries, but you do have still a pretty decent amount of life out of the battery even while it's doing that. Someone asked, how do I capture such good focused images at low shutter speeds? Remember, when we're dealing with the flash is stopping the action. The duration of these flashes is averaging around 1,000th of a second. The ambient light was very low. It was 5 or 6 stops lower than what the flash was putting out. So what that meant is the ambient light had a very small contribution. Since the flash is firing at 1,000th of a second, it doesn't matter if my shutter speed's at 1/30th of a second or 200th of a second. The amount of light hitting the subject's going to be exactly the same. So typically if I'm shooting a wedding, either at a reception or in a church, my shutter speed on my camera is either at 1/30th or even 1/15th of a second because the flash is going to stop the action. Now it's going to let some ambient light in, mostly in the distance. And you might say, well, it's the distance going to be out of focus because you're such a low shutter speed. The distance is out of focus anyway. I don't want the back wall to be in focus. I want my subject to be in focus. And the duration of the flash is what stops the action there. But good question. Before we continue on, let me ask one more. Somebody asked, shouldn't I use the RF socks, the radio frequency socks on the Canon speed lights? I've never run into any problems with noise from the Canon speed lights with the +3s or the +Xs. That was an issue with some of the Mini and Flexes, where some of the Canons were putting out a little excess radio frequency issues. I haven't run into that at all with the +3. They just fire. That's the beauty of it. It's just simple. It's just telling the flash to fire. And I've shot these from hundreds of yards away and consistently, never a problem there. So let's continue on. We'll have more questions to come up. So again, to review, I've got my handheld camera. That was, again, my Sony 99. I've got a remote camera in the aisle set to fire the 2 flashes, and then the 3rd camera behind the altar to capture that unique point of view. Let's put everything to work now, and let's see the cameras in use. Now, since I'm going to get to give away the bride, I'm going to have to dress a little better, so let's go back to the church. So I got a couple things missing. Well, first of all, I'm not ready for this wedding and I don't have a bride. In fact, I'm going to act as the father of the bride and give her away. So first thing we got to do is, I think I need to dress a little better. So let's take care of that first. Okay, that's better. So something's still missing. Wait a second, I need the bride. Hold on one second, let me get her. Much better. So here's the beautiful Angela, who I'm going to get to walk up the aisle and they really call it giving away, don't they? I'm not going to give her away. It's going to cost Phil some money if he wants to go through with this. So, shall we? All right, so obviously we're staging this because wouldn't do this in a real wedding. But what we're going to do now is I'm going to have Angela go back down the aisle and walk up. And when she hits each of those spots, then I'm going to take the shot. Now, actually just for a lark, just to have some fun, I'm going to walk up the aisle with her first, and I'm going to shoot my remote camera actually with the Pocket Wizard as I'm walking up the aisle with her. So hopefully it won't come down to that where you'll have to actually photograph your own wedding, but if you had to, you could get some shots out of it. So I've got my Pocket Wizard Plus 3 here. I've got Angela. I've got my remote camera way up on the front of the aisle. Everything's pre-metered, and if I just hit the test button, you'll probably see the lights go off in the video. There you go. I can actually photograph me walking up the aisle with her. So we're going to go ahead. I'm going to have her walk up the aisle, and we're going to get some shots. And then we're going to change things over where we're going to shoot ambient light on everything that takes place up at the altar. Oh, we're ready to walk up the aisle. You ready for this? Mm-hmm. You sure you want to go meet that guy at the end?
Let's do it.
Let's do it? All right. So I've still got my Pocket Wizard because I'm going to actually still fire the remote camera. I actually got my wife Diane acting as the photographer now. So she's using the Alpha 99, and when we hit the spot, she'll go ahead and take her shot. And just for giggles, I'm going to fire the other camera when I hit the spot from my hand. So, you ready? Mm-hmm. We should have some music. You know what? I'll put it in after the fact. Yeah. All right, let's go. And one thing I always tell as a photographer, tell the bride, is you got to walk slowly. Take your time. So actually where this would come into play, and we just kind of rewound, and we're going to go up again. But you would do this as a photographer also for all the bridesmaids. You know, if you have a ring bearer and mom being walked up and grandma and that kind of stuff. So you'd kind of repeat this. Since we only have a bride and a groom and our photographer, we're going to go ahead and just give it another shot. And so we've got Diane acting as the photographer, and I'm acting as the second photographer. In reality, she would be holding this as well. So let's go. But again, nice and slowly. It's not that long an aisle. And when you hit the spot, then we're just going to go ahead and take the first shot, which is going to be right about here. So go ahead, Di. One of the things about having this kind of setup also is that when you've got the flashes on manual power, we've got one set for 8th power, the other set for 16th power. So that means the capacitor doesn't completely discharge, so you can actually get a couple of shots out really quickly. Diane just did that. She just shot 1, 2 real quick and got 2 shots of the bride coming up the aisle. And again, generally with the bridesmaid, you're just going to go for the one, or again, in this case, since we've got 2 cameras, we can get one full length and one wide because this church is so beautiful. We wanted to get one to make sure we got in the glass as well. Okay, so we're back. A couple more questions. Keep them coming. Someone asked if the noise of several camera shutters is a distraction. I found, well, particularly the one behind the altar, I couldn't even hear it from the front of the altar. So that certainly was not a distraction. The shutters are fairly quiet in a building as large as a church, so you really don't hear them that much. So I did not find that a distraction. Someone asked if I could show the chart again that goes over the whole thing about the channels and zones, and I'm going to do that. Before I do that, though, let's just kind of clarify the difference between channels and zones. The Pocket Wizard Plus 3s have 32 channels, and channels 17 through 32 also offer you 4 zones. So what that means is I could set everybody on channel 17 or 18, and then assign zones. So that, for example, the camera behind the altar, I believe I set for zone B. So that I could turn that on and off from here, but still have everybody on the same channel. So I know it gets a little confusing. So actually, let's take a look at the chart again. All right, so again, I had my Sony Alpha 99 with the Plus 3 on top of the camera. That was on channel 18. Now, since I was sometimes using it to fire the camera behind the altar as well, I would turn off the zones and on as I needed. Also, I might want to fire my flashes that are in the aisle. So I had the flashes set on zones C and D. Now again, the remote camera behind the altar had a +3 with channel 18. Yes, that was my B camera. Now the camera in the aisle, the second remote camera, was set for channel 17 because it was on that relay mode. It was the only camera, the only unit on channel 17. And that's where it gets a little bit confusing. And then again, my flashes were all set on channel 18. So for example, I got the Sony Alpha 99. This is the camera I'm walking around with. Since I'm not shooting in relay mode, this is set to the same channel as my flashes. Now my flashes were set on C and D, so I just make sure C and D are both turned on here. I just go ahead and point to my scene, take my shot, and that's it. Now, I know Phil was in the chat room. Thank you guys for being in the chat room. Just to head this off, now, I'm going to show you something. Don't get too freaked out about it. This is a Pocket Wizard Flex TT5. No, they do not make a unit specifically for the Sony. However, the Sony camera only has one pin on the top of it. So there's two ways I can use these on other cameras. Now, since the Sony only has one pin on it, I can match the channels, and I do that again by hooking up the USB cable to the little port in the front of the unit. I have my channel, I've got two channels that I can access. In fact, Rick, if you would just zoom in on here so I can show you that. On the top of the Flex, I've got two channels, channel 1 and channel 2, and I've got A, B, and C. I've got 3 zones here instead of 4. Now I have channel 1 set for channel 17 and channel 2 set for channel 18. Now in addition, my channel 1 in the software, and again, this is a subject for another day. In fact, there are videos on the Pocket Wizard site that will go over this. I have channel 1, my channel 17, set to something called trigger-only mode. In essence, what that does is it turns that channel, it turns the Flex into a regular +3, +2, +X. It just becomes a simple trigger. Doesn't really care what camera it's on, it's just going to send out that fire signal. So while I've got this on here, strangely enough, the Sony, since it only has a single pin, I can even use my channel 18, which I have my channel 2. So channel 2 set for 18, and I can fire that as well. It makes things very simple to be able to mix. Again, I have my A, B, C, D, so I do have to make sure that my channels match. But you can actually use these on other cameras. In fact, I had a discussion this morning, and I think it would be a worthwhile program to actually show using Pocket Wizards on cameras specifically that are not going to be Canons and Nikons. And we'll go into some of the mirrorless cameras, some of the smaller cameras, and we'll show you what you can do. So really the bottom line is I can use, if you have TT1s and TT5s, everything that I'm doing, you can also do with these. The one exception is, the one thing unique about the +3 is that half button push that allows the camera to be woken up remotely. That is something unique to the +3, but all of the relay shooting and all of the other channel stuff that I'm doing, you could also do with those units. So let's see, any other questions I need to answer before we continue on? Let's see. Oh, good question. Somebody else, what else did I have in my hand along with the +3 when I'm walking the aisle? I don't think I had anything else in my hand. I had the +3 in the camera. That was it. I did use, could I fire my remote cameras with the +3 on top of the camera and change that channel up and down? I could. I had my handheld cameras on channel 18, that one camera in the altar, in the aisleway. Not the altar, the aisleway was on channel 17. Yes, I could get the unit on top of my camera and change it. I found it easier to keep my +3 on the camera on the channel 18, which matched my flashes and the altar camera, and had the one in my hand set for channel 17. And that's what I fired the aisle camera with. Now again, this might be a lot to try to keep track of. I don't know that I would necessarily do a wedding with me responsible for firing 2 cameras. Me personally, when I shoot weddings, I do not do them solo. I refuse to do that. I always have a second shooter, so we would split that up a little bit more. Again, really, I'm just trying to show you all the possibilities with one person. Let's see. This is kind of a side question, but someone asked, how do I deal with other quote-unquote photographers getting in the way of my camera? During the service, generally I'm the only one walking around, or my second shooter. That's more a problem at receptions. And it's just a matter of having a conversation with people. Just let them know, you're the one that was contracted, you're the one that was being paid to be there. Let me get my shots, please. You have to be just a little bit forceful sometimes, that's all. And then lastly, someone said they're interested in mixing ambient light with flash. Now, there is a webinar posted on that, but I'm going to be revisiting that shortly, so stay tuned. That's a whole nother subject. Okay, so let's continue on. So that covered walking up the aisle, and yes, I wish I could always get changed that quickly. Now let's move up to the altar. Now I decided to temporarily put the camera that was in the aisle off to one side of the altar. There was a walkway over behind where the organ was so that I could position the camera that was in the aisle coming from the side. This may or may not be possible in a real wedding, depending on how long the service is and how accessible the spots around the altar are. Whenever I'm shooting a wedding, I scout out the venue ahead of time. Before showing up on the wedding day, I want to know where I can position my gear. I want to talk to the officiant, find out what I'm allowed to do, where I'm allowed to go, and if they're okay with me putting these remote camera setups. And generally, if you talk to people, they'll let you go. Generally, the one thing you're not allowed to do is during the ceremony use flash. That's why I meter everything ahead of time, dial that into the camera, and go. And again, going back to this image here, this was ambient light on my 11-16 behind the altar camera, and this is 1600 ISO. So with today's software, I did my edit on this in Lightroom. The noise reduction is phenomenal. I was able to get a really big, nice print. I'm also going to discuss in this next video using a color checker passport and revisit kind of the color and white balance reference. Again, as I said, in this type of lighting, I'll usually add warmth to the white balance because the tungsten lights do add a warm glow, and it's kind of what your eyes remember seeing. And I don't want to actually take that out of the image. So let's now see our two remote cameras, now both behind the altar in action. So here we are. We've got Angela, we got Phil, and we have Reverend Betty. Reverend Betty, say hi, everybody.
Hello.
Okay. So what we're doing right now, obviously as the photographer or the father or bride or whatever it is I'm supposed to be today, I would not be standing here at this point, but I just want to show you what's going on. Again, before the ceremony, I spoke with Reverend Betty about where everybody's going to be in position-wise. So what I've done is I'm going to have a camera I'll walk around with, and we're shooting ambient light now. We're not shooting any flashes once the ceremony starts taking place. So I'm using a light meter again. I'm getting my reading right here. And I'm probably going to go up to, at 1600 ISO, I'm getting f4.5. If I go up to 3200, I'm getting 6.3. I think I'm going to opt for the 1600 ISO at 4.5. That's the number I'll put on my camera at a 60th of a second. I'm going to be shooting fairly wide. I have a 24-70 lens on my Sony. Off in the distance, Rick, if you go over and pan over to that, I've got a Canon 7D with a 70-200 lens on. It's actually at 70 right now. And that is got a Pocket Wizard remote on it that's on my channel D. And that's going to be pointing back here where Angela and Phil are. So I've got a point of view again that I could not get if I was actually as a photographer. The camera's already in position out of the way. There's no flash, so it's not going to bother anybody. So I can fire that camera from the Pocket Wizard or from my camera. Later on, they're going to move right up to the altar where I've got that camera on the F plate sitting behind with a wide angle lens that's going to give us a really cool point of view. So let's go ahead and get some shots. Okay, so now I'm acting as the photographer. I've got my Sony Alpha 99 in my hand. You saw the 70-200 on the Canon 7D off in the distance. I have two options. I can keep one Pocket Wizard in my hand, or I can use the Pocket Wizard on top of the camera to actually do my remote shooting. Or, one step further, I can do them both at the same time. So right now, first of all, I'm going to turn this off. So I've got just channel 17, but none of my zones are active. So if I just put the numbers that we had for my meter, I get my shot. And just get Reverend Betty to smile a little bit. There we go. Got her there. Now if I want to fire the camera from the back, I can just hit the test button here, which will take a shot. And just turn those zones on. Hit the test button, takes a shot, or I can have this on and shoot both places at the same time. So it's pretty cool. It allows me to get, again, 2 shots, 1 photographer. So again, you can see we've got them in position. I've got a camera in a place that I, as a photographer, would not be able to go. I can just walk around the sanctuary down here, get the shots as I see fit, but without using my flash. So again, I would scout this out. I always scout out my line of sight first. And when I see a look that I want, that's it, I'm good to go. Actually, as long as I'm here. Angela, turn towards me a little bit. Yeah, that's it, right there. You're gonna be a little happier about it though. You're supposed to be getting married today. That was cute. Love it. And there's one other piece that we didn't talk about. And in fact, I'm gonna go grab one so we can see it on the video. And that's, again, before I do any of this, I gotta make sure I've got a color checker so I can get the correct color for this scene, because we've got a little bit of mixed lighting going on here. So I wanna make sure that the white balance that I've got is gonna end up being perfect. Okay, so I've got a color checker passport here. I do wanna make sure that my color is going to be correct for this light. I could dial in a preset here. I could dial in tungsten light and assume that's correct. However, these lights, there's a couple different types of light bulbs here. So the color temperature, I'm going to guess, is going to be a little bit different. So by doing this, it's going to put everything into place. I'm just going to hold this out here and get my shot under the correct light. Beautiful. So now I've got a reference. When I create a profile for this, all the colors are going to snap into place. As the photographer, this is my limit. This is as far as I can go, and they've moved up to the altar. Now I can certainly take my shots from here, and it's actually a very nice scene from here as well. That's lovely. It's actually a beautiful setting here. This is a beautiful church. So I've got my shots here, but there's also a point of view that I can only get using that remote camera. And again, I can do it either from here, or I like having another pocket was in my hand, so I don't have to worry about using my camera to do it. And I can just take pictures from here. So actually, if you go ahead and pan over, you can see where they are. You can see they're up by the altar. I can't go up there, but as a photographer with my remote camera, I can just take pictures as I like. Now, I'll come in frame. Now, again, normally as a photographer, I would not be allowed up here. But I've got my remote camera off behind there. Now, one thing I've got different is this time I've left autofocus on. Because the beauty of that is they're gonna be moving around. And if I just had a really short, narrow depth of field, I may or may not get them in. So by pushing in the button halfway, I can get the camera to focus, and then when it's ready to press it all the way. And when I see the scene that I want, or the look I want, I can just start hitting the test button and get my shots. Again, this is a pretty wide angle lens, but the beauty of that is it's gonna be a lot of latitude for cropping. And again, remember, it's a 17 megapixel camera. I'm probably gonna use images this big maybe that are going to go into the actual album. So I've got plenty of resolution to crop way down even a quarter of the frame or less and still have all the resolution I need. So go ahead and you guys do your thing. And while they're doing this, I'll go down back into the sanctuary. I'll get my lights set up again. All right, a couple questions, and I have one more video to show you. I'm going to run a little over our hour, so if you have to leave, we'll let you know about the recording. But if you can hang around, give us another couple more minutes and we'll finish things up. I realized someone else asked earlier, what else did I have in my hand? What I was actually had, and I saw it in the video, was I had the Sekonic 308 meter hanging around my neck. That was the other thing. Somebody asked a good question. Since the depth of field is so good on the short lenses, do you really need to use the autofocus on the remote camera rather than focus on a spot and shoot? Good question. Yes, you could pre-focus in that situation if I had really stopped and thought about how much depth of field I had. Since I wasn't familiar with this venue, I didn't know exactly where Reverend Betty was going to head during the course of the ceremony, and if she got closer, that was beyond, different depth of field than my focus point. I at least had the ability to refocus doing that. Could I have gotten away with pre-focusing? In that case, probably yes, but having the ability to focus was pretty handy. And yes, that was my tux, it wasn't rented. Wise, there's always a wise guy out there. Someone asked, can you remote focus with a TT5? Not the TT, you don't have the half button push on the TT5. However, if you wanted to be able to do that and have the camera focusing, that's where the pre-release triggers come in. If you put it on, turn the switch on to number 1, then the camera will always be focusing. So that's the way that you would do it if you're using a TT5. Okay, so Having gotten the images from the altar I wanted, I then took the remote camera 2, the one that I put off to the side, and put it back into the aisle. I reframed and refocused, and I just turned around the lights on the light stand so that I could get pictures of the bride and groom leaving the church. By the way, I'm also, during this little video segment, I'm going to show you a real old school trick that will make getting your distance perfect very quickly. What I did was just left them where they were and rotated them around so they're now facing this way. I know I've already measured my distance again, so I'll just put my camera on the settings we had before, which was 800 ISO, a 60th of a second, and we were at f7. Same numbers, position myself, and I got the bride and groom leaving the church after. The beauty of this, every shot's going to be in focus and every shot's going to be perfectly exposed because it's all being handled manually. So the ceremony's over. The bride and groom are going to head down the aisle. Once again, I've got my lights set up. Follow me, I'm going to show you something real old school. In case you have trouble figuring out what 8 to 10 feet is, well, here's something you can do. Yes, this is old school. Get yourself a piece of twine and actually attach it to your light stand. Measure, take your measurement at that point. Then from that point on, any place you move your light stand, I can just walk this out until I get to the distance and know this is my shooting spot for my perfect exposure. I'm right back where I was. I'm f7, 60th of a second at ISO 800. As soon as they hit this spot, I know my exposure is going to be perfect. So if it's not easy to meter or you have to move your lights quickly or just change the direction, as long as this distance stays the same, your exposure is going to stay the same and it's going to be perfect every time. So a bit of old school, but sometimes analog works. So I've got my lights set. I'm just going to wait for my bride and groom to come down the aisle, and I just need to either pre-focus if my camera's not good at that. Some cameras are better than others at focusing in low light, but I like to pre-focus. I know that as soon as they hit this spot, that's the time to take my shot. So what I'll typically do is look for a hard edge. I'll pre-focus on that, position myself for them to come through and get my shot. So let's go ahead and do that. So I pre-focused. Turn my camera on manual, and let's go, guys. Okay, slow, just like slowly, slow motion here. Right here at me. Good, one more, keep going. Beautiful. All right. All right, a couple last questions before we get close to the end here. First of all, a couple folks asked about different white balance tools. I have standardized on the the Color Checker Passport for all my white balance. I've used other tools in the past. If you find something that works for you that you like, by all means, go ahead and use it. I find this to be the easiest and the most consistent, and it's the easiest to use, and the fact that it folds down into nothing, can fit in a pocket, and is well protected. That's why I've decided on the Color Checker. Someone asked, did I use the Canons because of the high ISO? I use the Canons because that's what I had available. They were my wife's cameras. I use those as my remote. My main camera, again, is the Sony Alpha 99. To me, it just has, it even has better high ISO performance. And again, just to clarify, I've got a Flex TT5 on top of here. Yes, I do. But this is actually a Canon Flex TT5. It's not designed for the Sony. It just happens to work, particularly if you put them in trigger mode, trigger-only mode. And again, you can see, I'm not sure how well you see the flash coming through the video, but if I focus here and take my shot, the flash does fire. You may not always see it. Keep in mind that video is, we're running at 24 frames a second. Flash duration is only 1,000th. So you might see it like every third time it fires because that's just the way video is. Sometimes it falls in the holes. Okay, I think that's it for the questions. So I had to end the day with some outside shots since it was a beautiful day. In addition, when we got outside, there was a white Rolls Royce in the parking lot. We just had to take advantage. When I do outside portraits, I'll usually continue to use my off-camera flash to fill in shadows and add a nice catch light in the eye. That comes to the whole thing about using flash and ambient outside, and stay tuned, we'll be exploring that in more detail soon in the future. Now, I didn't mean to scare you off with all the gear I used during this one shoot. Really what I wanted to do was show you the possibilities of placing gear in remote locations so that you can get shots otherwise not possible. Excuse me. This capability will add more interest in your results, and it's going to help differentiate your work from others. It's a very crowded marketplace out there. There's a lot of competition for both those of you doing this full-time and those of you supplementing your income. By separating yourself out from everyone else, you're going to offer something unique, and that's going to help you book more jobs. Now, keep in mind that I would use the same exact remote camera setup at the reception. Now, wherever there's a point of view that's interesting, that I can't easily get back and forth to. Two that I will use frequently. One, if there's a balcony above the dance floor, I will almost always put a camera up there. Another place you could put it, and the F-plate would be perfect for this, is actually from the DJ's or the band's point of view. I wouldn't normally be able to stand next to them while they're doing their thing, but having a remote camera like that would allow me to do that. It lets me get unique shots. My clients love it, and I find it a lot of fun to do as well. It adds a lot of interest to the event. Now, for more information on the equipment I used today, we're going to send you a follow-up email with links to all the gear. I'd like to thank Pocket Wizard for sponsoring us today, and I'd like to thank again Reverend Betty McWhorter for her gracious help and the use of St. Mary's Church. Thanks for watching. I'll look forward to seeing you online again soon. I'm going to leave you today with a short selection of some of my favorite images captured during the day. So until next time, be well, keep learning, and keep shooting. Bye-bye.